In this video, we are going to talk about comparative politics. We will talk about comparative politics of about 12 countries. The countries include Nigeria, South Africa, Mexico, Brazil, India, Iran, China, Russia, Japan, France, United States, and United Kingdom. But we will just talk about simply what comparative politics is. We will try to explore some questions, and the questions are: what is comparative politics? Comparative politics is the study and comparison of politics across countries. Studying politics comparatively allows us to examine some of the major questions of political science. Why do some countries have democratic regimes while others experience authoritarianism? Why and how do regimes change? Why are some countries affluent and growing while others experience poverty and decline? In this volume, we describe and analyze 12 political systems focusing on their major geographic and demographic features, the, the origins and development of each state, their political regimes, their patterns of political conflict and competition, their societies, their political economies, and their relationships with the world. In this introductory chapter, we briefly summarize some key terms and concepts that will help you better understand these cases. Comparing states. States are organizations that maintain a monopoly of violence over a territory. I repeat, the states are organizations that maintain a monopoly of violence over a territory. The term state can be confusing because in the United States it also refers to subnational government, that is the 50 states. Whereas political scientists use a state to refer to a national organization, in this book, a state is used in this broader sense. However, the concept of the state is still narrower than the notion of a country, which also includes the territory and people living within a state. As illustrated by our collection of cases, states can differ in many ways, including in their origins, the length of their existence, their strength, and the history of government. The government is the leadership or elite that administers the state. Two of the most obvious differences among states are in their size and their population. The 12 countries included in this book vary considerably in both respects. States also vary in their natural endowments, such as arable land, mineral resources, navigable rivers, and access to the sea. Well endowed states may have advantages over poorly endowed ones, but resource endowments do not necessarily determine the prosperity of a state. Japan, for example, has become one of the world's dominant economic powers despite having relatively few natural resources. Russia and Iran, on the other hand, are rich in natural resources but have struggled economically. States also differ widely in their origins and historical development. Some countries, for example, China, France, and the United Kingdom, have long histories of statehood. Many countries in the developing world became states only after they were decolonized. Nigeria, for example, became an independent state recently in 1960. With the end of the Cold War in 1989 and the collapse of the Soviet Union 2 years later, a number of states emerged or re emerged. States differ. two, in their level of organization, effectiveness, and stability. The power of a state depends in part on its legitimacy or the extent to which its authority is regarded as right and proper. Political scientists have long observed that there are different sources of a state's legitimacy. A state authority may draw on traditional legitimacy, in which the state is obeyed because it has a long tradition of being obeyed. Alternatively, a state may be considered legitimate because of charismatic legitimacy. Its identification with the magnetic appeal of a leader or movement. Finally, states may gain legitimacy on the basis of rational legal legitimacy, a system of laws and procedures that become highly institutionalized. Although most modern states derived their legitimacy from rational legal sources, both traditional and charismatic legitimacy often continue to play a role. In Japan and the United Kingdom, for example, the monarchy is a source of traditional legitimacy that complements the rational legal legitimacy of the state. Some post colonial states in the developing world have had considerable trouble establishing legitimacy. Often, colonial powers created states that cut across ethnic boundaries or contain hostile ethnic groups, as is the case of Nigeria and Iran. States differ in their ability to preserve their sovereignty and carry out the basic functions of maintaining law and order. Strong states can perform the basic tasks of defending their borders from outside attacks and defending their authority from internal non state rivals. Weak states have trouble carrying out those basic tasks and often suffer from endemic internal violence, a poor infrastructure, and the inability to collect taxes and enforce the rule of law. High levels of corruption are often a system of state weakness. Taken to an extreme, weak states may experience a complete loss of legitimacy and power and may be overwhelmed by anarchy and violence. Political scientists refer to those relatively rare cases as failed states. Finally, states differ in the degree to which they centralize or disperse political power. Unitary states concentrate most of their political power in the national capital, allocating little decision making power to regions or localities. Federal states divide power between the central state and regional or local authorities such as provinces, countries, and cities. Unitary states like the United Kingdom and South Africa may be stronger and more decisive, but the centralization of power may create local resentment and initiate calls for a devolution or the handing down of power to regions and localities. Federal states like Brazil and Russia often find that their dispersal of power hampers national decision making and accountability. Comparing regimes. Political regimes are the norms and rules regarding individual freedoms and collective equality, the locus of power, and the use of that power. It is easiest to think of political regimes as the rules of the game governing the exercise of power. In modern political systems, regimes are most often described in written constitutions. In some countries, however, such as the United Kingdom, the regime consists of a combination of laws and customs, that are incorporated into any one written document. In other countries such as China and Iran, written constitutions do not accurately describe the extra constitutional rules that govern the exercise of power. Democratic regimes have rules that emphasize a large role for the public in governance and protect basic rights and freedoms. Authoritarian regimes limit the role of the public in decision making and often deny citizens basic rights and restrict their freedoms. In the past quarter century, the world has witnessed a dramatic rise in the number of democratic regimes. Over half the world's population, however, is still governed by non democratic regimes, which one leading research organization defines as either partly free or illiberal, meaning some personal liberties and democratic rights are limited, or not free or authoritarian, meaning that the public has little individual freedom. Comparing democratic political institutions. Most political regimes, whether democratic or not, establish a number of political institutions. The executive is the branch of government that carries out the laws and policies of a given state. We can think of the executive as containing two separate sets of duties. The head of a state symbolizes and represents the people both nationally and internationally, embodying and articulating the goals of the regime, and the head of government deals with the everyday tasks of running the state, such as formulating and executing policy. The distinction between those rules is most easily seen in systems like those of Japan, the United Kingdom, and France, who is have separate heads of state and heads of government. Other systems like those of Brazil, Mexico, South Africa, and the United States assign the two roles to a single individual. The legislature is the branch of government formally charged with making laws. The organization and power of legislatures differ considerably. In some political regimes, especially authoritarian ones like China and Iran, the legislature has little power or initiative and serves mainly uh, lit- uh, in some political regimes, especially authoritarian ones like China and Iran, the legislature has little power or initiative and serves mainly to rubber stamp government legislation. In other systems like that of the United States, the legislature is relatively powerful and autonomous. Unicameral legislatures, often found in smaller countries, consist of a single chamber. Bicameral legislatures consist of two legislative chambers. In those cases, one chamber often represents the population at large, referred to as the lower chamber, and the other, referred to as the upper house, reflects the geographical subunits. The judiciary is the branch of a country's government that is concerned with dispensing justice. The Constitutional Court is the highest judicial body to rule on the constitutionality of laws and other government actions. In most political systems, the Constitutional Court also formally oversees the entire judicial structures. The power of a regime's judiciary is determined in part by the nature of its power of judicial review. The mechanism by which the court reviews laws and policies and overturns those seen as violations of the Constitution, Some regimes give the judiciary the power of concrete review, allowing the High Court to rule on constitutional issues only when disputes are brought before it. Other regimes give the judiciary the power of abstract review, allowing it to decide questions that do not arise from legal cases, sometimes even allowing it to make judgments on legislation that has not been enacted. In France, the Constitutional Council has only powers of abstract review, while in the United States, the Supreme Court has only the power of concrete review. The highest courts in England, by contrast, do not have power to overturn legislation under any circumstances. The powers of those political institutions and the relationships among them vary considerably across regimes. The most important variation concerns the relationship between the legislature and the executive. There are three major models of legislative executive relations within democratic regimes. The parliamentary system features an executive head of government, often referred to as a prime minister. Usually elected from within the legislature, the prime minister is usually the leader of the largest political party in the legislature. The Prime Minister and the Cabinet, the body of chief ministers or officials in government in charge of policy areas such as defense, agriculture, and so on, are charged with formulating and executing policy. The head of a state in such systems is usually either an indirectly elected or largely ceremonial president or hereditary monarch. The presidential system combines the roles of head of state and uh, head of government in the office of the president. These systems feature a directly elected president who holds most of the government's executive powers. Presidential systems have directly elected legislatures that to varying degrees serve as a check on presidential authority. There has been much scholarly debate about the advantages and disadvantages of these two legislative executive models. Parliamentary systems are often praised for reducing conflict between the legislature and the executive, since the executive is approved by the legislature, thus producing more efficient government. In addition, when parliamentary legislatures lack a majority, political parties must compromise to create a government supported by a majority of the legislature. Parliamentary systems are also more flexible because when prime ministers lose the support of the legislature, they can be swiftly removed through a legislative vote of no confidence. The appointment of a new prime minister or the convocation of new elections can often resolve political deadlocks. But critics point out that parliamentary systems with a strong majority in the legislature can produce a very strong, virtually unchecked government. Moreover, in fractious legislatures, it can be difficult to cobble together a stable majority government. Presidential systems are often portrayed as more stable. There are fixed terms of office for the president and the legislature, which is not the case in most parliamentary systems. Moreover, presidents are directly elected by the public and can be removed only by the legislature and only in cases of criminal misconduct. Nonetheless, presidential systems have been criticized for producing decisive winner take all outcomes, lacking the flexibility needed to confront crises. and leading to overly powerful executives in the face of weak and divided legislatures. In an attempt to avoid the weaknesses of parliamentary and presidential systems, some newer democratic regimes, like those of France and Russia, have adopted a third model of legislative executive relations called the semi presidential system. This system includes both a prime minister approved by the legislature and a directly elected president, with the two sharing executive power. In practice, semi presidential systems tend to produce strong precedents akin to those in pure presidential systems. But the exact balance between the executives varies from case to case. A final political institution worth mentioning is the electoral system, which determines how votes are cast and counted. Most democratic regimes use one of two models. The most commonly employed is proportional representation, or simply it's called PR. PR relies upon multi-chamber districts (MMDs) in which more than one legislative seat is contested in each electoral district. Voters cast their ballots for a list of party candidates rather than for a single representatives. And the percentage of votes a party receives in a district determines how many of that district seats the party will win. Thus, the percentage of votes each party wins in each district should closely correspond to the percentage of seats allocated to each party. PR systems produce legislatures that often closely reflect the percentage of votes owned nationwide by each political party. As a result, they tend to foster multiple political parties, including small ones. A minority of democracies, mainly the United Kingdom and its former colonies such as India and Nigeria, rely upon single member districts or SMMDs. In these systems, there is only one representative for each constituency, and in each district the candidate with the greatest number of votes, and not necessarily a majority, wins the seat. As opposed to peer systems, SMD votes cast for all but the one winning candidate are wasted. That is, they do not count toward any representation in the legislature. SMD systems tend to discriminate against small parties, especially those with a national following rather than a geographically concentrated following. As with the legislative executive models, there is a vigorous debate about which electoral system is more desirable. Peer systems are considered more democratic since they waste fewer votes and encourage the expression of a greater range of political interests. Peer increases the number of parties able to win seats in a legislature and allows parties concerned with narrow or minority interests to gain representation. SMD systems are often endorsed because they allow voters in each district to connect directly with their elected representatives instead of their party, making the representatives more accountable to the electorate. Supporters of SMD argue that it is beneficial to SMD systems as more likely to produce stable, centrist legislative majorities. Some democracies, including a number of newer ones, such as Russia and Mexico, have combined SMD and peer voting systems in what is known as a mixed electoral system. Voters are given two votes, one for a candidate and the other for a party. Candidates in the assemblies are elected on the basis of a plurality, while other seats are elected from MMDs and allocated using fear. Comparing non-democratic regimes. Many non-democratic regimes have institutions that can, on paper, appear quite similar to those in democratic regimes. In most authoritarian regimes, however, the legislature, the judiciary, and the electoral system do not reveal much about the exercise of political power. Non-democratic regimes differ from one another in a number of important ways. Common forms of non-democratic regimes include personal dictatorships, monarchies, military regimes, one-party regimes, theocracies, and illiberal regimes. A personal dictatorship like that of Porfirio Diaz in Mexico from 1876 to 1910 is based on the power of a single strong leader who usually relies on charismatic or traditional authority to maintain power. In a military regime such as Brazil from 1964 to 1985 or Nigeria from 1966 to 1979, the institution of the military dominates politics. A one-party regime like Mexico from 1917 to 2000 is dominated by a strong political party that relies upon a broad membership as a source of political control. In a theocracy, a rare form of government, though the one that characterizes present-day Iran, a leader claims to rule on behalf of God. An illiberal regime, as in present-day Russia, retains the basic structures of a democracy but does not protect civil liberties. In the real world, many non-democratic regimes combine various aspects of these types. Communist regimes are one-party regimes in which a communist party controls most aspects of a country's political and economic systems. A specific communist regimes such as China under Mao Zedong or the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin have sometimes been described as totalitarian. Totalitarian regimes feature a strong official ideology that seeks to transform fundamental aspects of the state, society, and the economy using a wide array of organizations and the application of force. A non-communist example of totalitarianism is Nazi Germany or Nazi Germany. Non-democratic regimes use different tools to impose their political domination. The most obvious mechanisms are state violence and surveillance. The enforcement ranges from systematic and widespread repression, as in the mass purges in the Soviet Union or contemporary Iran, to sporadic and selective repression of the regime's opponents, as in Brazil in the 1960s. Another important tool of non-democratic regimes is co-optation, whereby members of the public are brought into a beneficial relationship with the state and the government. Cooperation takes many forms, including corporatism, in which citizen participation is channeled into state-sanctioned groups, clientelism, in which the state provides benefits to groups of its political supporters, and rent-seeking, in which the government allows its supporters to occupy positions of power in order to monopolize state benefits. The non-democratic regime that dominated Mexico for much of the 20th century skillfully employed all of those forms of co-optation to garner public support for the governing party, minimizing its need to rely upon coercion. Finally, the mechanism of control that is most often employed in totalitarian regimes is the personality cult, or the state sponsored exaltation of a leader. The personality cult of Stalin in the Soviet Union and that of Mao in China are prime examples, as is the cult of personality that developed around Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, the leader of the Iranian Revolution of 1979. So, here I like to put an end to this live, and in our next lives we will talk about comparative politics about 12 countries around the world, from United States to Japan. So thank you very much, and those who have listened to this video, please try to subscribe this channel. If you want to, if you enjoy this video, you can subscribe to this channel. Wishing you all good health, good hygiene, and good future, and good prosperity. Thank you. Bye bye.